Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. We get a lot of questions from you about robotic affirmations after we mentioned them on the last show, so we reached out to an expert, and we're going to deep dive into the topic today.
Glad to be here.
So I started listening to this podcast called Inner Balance Redprint, and I got to say, the idea of using robotic voices for personal development, uh, it's pretty out there. What do you think about it?
It's definitely an interesting concept. I think what makes it so fascinating is the way it combines technology with the power of the mind. We often talk about the importance of mindset and positive thinking, but this takes it to a whole new level.
Right, and Inner Balance Redprint really dives into that. They talk about this thing called neuroplasticity, which is basically the brain's ability to rewire itself based on what we experience and think about consistently. It's like our brains are constantly adapting and changing.
Yeah, exactly. The podcast uses this really cool analogy of the mind being like a computer. Our beliefs and habits are the operating system, and robotic affirmations are like code that can rewrite that system.
So are you saying we can literally reprogram our brains using robotic affirmations? I mean, that sounds kind of crazy, but also kind of amazing.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but the idea is that by consistently exposing ourselves to positive statements in a robotic voice, we can potentially influence our subconscious beliefs and ultimately change our behaviors.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But before we go any further, let's define what robotic affirmations actually are. I mean, what exactly are we talking about here?
Basically, it's just what it sounds like, affirmations delivered in a robot's neutral, unemotional voice. Those positive statements like, I am confident or I am successful. Instead of repeating them to ourselves or listening to them in a human voice, we use technology to generate them in a robotic tone.
Okay, so why a robot voice? Wouldn't that be weird?
It might sound strange at first, but
Hmm.
the idea is that a robotic voice actually has some advantages over a human voice. Think about it, when we hear affirmations from another person, we might judge them or resist the message without even realizing it. Ah, I see what you're saying. Like our internal critic might chime in and say, oh, yeah, right, or that's not true for me.
Exactly. But a robotic voice kind of bypasses that emotional baggage. It's just a neutral delivery of the message.
So it's like sneaking past our defenses and planting those positive seeds directly into our subconscious. I like that.
Right. Plus, robots are consistent, unlike us humans. They don't get tired or emotional. They can deliver those affirmations 247 if we want them to.
That's true. No matter how much we try to stay positive, sometimes life gets in the way and we slip up. But a robot would never have a bad day or forget to give us our dose of positivity.
Exactly. And because we're talking about technology, it means we can customize these affirmations to fit our specific needs and goals.
Oh, so it's not just a one-size-fits-all thing. We can tailor the affirmations to whatever we're working on, whether it's confidence, productivity, relationships, or anything else.
Precisely. You could have a whole library of robotic affirmations for different areas of your life. This is blowing my mind. So, wait, are you telling me my Alexa could become my personal robotic affirmation coach? That's
No.
kind of amazing and kind of creepy at the same time.
Haha, it's definitely a sign of the times, isn't it? Technology is blurring the lines between the real and the virtual in so many ways. But before we get too deep into the philosophical implications, let's bring it back to the practical side. How do we actually use these robotic affirmations? I know the Inner Balance Redprint podcast laid out a specific process.
Yeah, they did. So walk us through it. What's the first step?
The first step is all about getting crystal clear on your goals. What do you want to achieve? What areas of your life do you want to improve?
So if I want to be more confident, for example,
Mhm.
I would start by saying, I want to be more confident.
You could, but it's actually more effective to phrase it in the present tense as if it's already true. So instead of I want to be more confident, you would say I am confident.
Ah, I get it. It's like we're tricking our minds into believing it's already a reality.
Right. And the podcast emphasizes that it's important to be specific with your affirmations. Instead of just saying, I am confident, you might say, I am confident and capable of achieving my goals.
So the more specific, the better.
Exactly. The clearer you are about what you want, the more likely you are to achieve it. All right, so we've defined our goals and crafted our affirmations. Now what? What role does technology play in all this?
That's a great question. I'm assuming this is where the robots come in.
You got it. Step 3 is all about using technology to generate those robotic affirmations. There are a bunch of tools you can use, like text-to-speech software or even AI platforms. There are also some apps specifically designed for affirmations like MindZoom and ThinkUp.
So we're basically creating a playlist of robot-voiced affirmations. I can already picture it.
Yep, that's exactly it. You can even experiment with different robotic voices to find one that resonates with you. Some people prefer a more soothing voice, while others like something more upbeat and energetic.
I guess it's like choosing the right music for your workout playlist. Different vibes for different goals.
Okay, so we've got our goals, affirmations, and our robot voice all set. What's next?
The next step is all about consistency. It's not enough to just create those affirmations. You have to listen to them regularly. The podcast recommends making it a daily habit, like brushing your teeth, but for your mind.
So we're basically immersing ourselves in these positive messages throughout the day. Doesn't matter when we listen to them.
It can. Some people find it helpful to listen to them first thing in the morning to set the tone for the day. Others prefer to listen to them before bed to let those positive messages sink in while they sleep. You can also listen to them while you work out, commute, or do chores. The key is to find what works best for you and stick with it.
So it's all about finding a routine that fits our lifestyle and making it a habit. Makes sense. What about tracking our progress? How do we know if these robotic affirmations are actually working? That's where the final step comes in. The podcast suggests keeping a journal to monitor your thoughts, feelings, and any changes you notice in your behavior.
So it's like a science experiment. We're collecting data on ourselves to see if there's any correlation between listening to robotic affirmations and positive changes in our lives.
Exactly. It's a way to become more self-aware and track our progress over time. You might notice that you're feeling more confident, more motivated, or more optimistic. Or you might see changes in your behavior like taking more risks or setting bigger goals.
I like that. It's not just about passively listening. It's about actively paying attention to how these affirmations are impacting us.
Exactly. It's about becoming the scientist of our own lives.
Okay, so we've got the steps down, but I'm still a little skeptical. Is there any real evidence that this stuff actually works? Like, are there studies showing that robotic affirmations can change our brains and behavior?
That's a great question and one we'll dive into in part 2.
All right, cliffhanger. I can't wait to hear more about the science behind all this.
Me too. It's going to be fascinating.
All right, so before the break, you asked about the science behind robotic affirmations.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know if there's any actual evidence that this stuff works.
Well, like I said earlier, there isn't a ton of research specifically on robotic affirmations yet, but that doesn't mean the whole idea is baseless. There's actually a lot of scientific support for the underlying principles.
Okay, so break it down for me. What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, the biggest piece of the puzzle is neuroplasticity. Remember, that's the brain's ability to change and adapt over time.
Right. You were saying that our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences and thoughts.
Exactly. And this isn't just some new age theory. It's backed by decades of research in neuroscience. We know for a fact that the brain is incredibly malleable and that we can intentionally shape its structure and function through things like repetition and focused attention.
So even if it's coming from a robot voice, if we're hearing these positive affirmations over and over again, our brains might actually start to change physically. That's the idea. It's like creating new neural pathways that reinforce those positive beliefs. Think of it like learning a new skill. The more you practice, the stronger those connections in your brain become.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about affirmations specifically? Have scientists studied whether they actually work?
They have, and the results are pretty promising. There have been studies showing that affirmations can lead to measurable changes in brain activity, particularly in areas associated with self-perception and emotional regulation.
Wow. So it's not just about feeling good. It's actually changing how our brains are working.
Right. And some studies have even shown that affirmations can lower stress hormones and boost self-esteem. So there's definitely evidence to suggest that positive self-talk can have a real impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there's still a lot we don't know, like whether a robotic voice makes a difference compared to a human voice.
You're absolutely right. That's where more research is needed. We need to explore things like the ideal frequency, duration, and even the type of robotic voice that's most effective. There's a whole world of possibilities to explore.
I can see it now. Robot voice optimization for maximum affirmation impact. That's going to be a whole field of study.
Haha, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
But even though the research on robotic affirmations is still in its early stages, the foundation is there. We know that our brains are adaptable, that affirmations can influence our thoughts and feelings, and that technology can play a role in enhancing those effects.
So it's not just about blindly believing in the power of robots. It's about understanding the science behind it and using that knowledge to our advantage.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be discerning consumers of information. Not every new technology or technique is going to be a game changer. We need to think critically, evaluate the evidence, and make informed choices about what we're putting into our minds.
Okay, that's a great point.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it sounds like we should also be open to trying new things and seeing what works for us.
Absolutely. If something resonates with you and you're curious to see if it can make a difference in your life, go for it. Just make sure you're doing it with a critical mind and paying attention to the results.
I love that. It's about finding that balance between being skeptical and being open-minded.
Exactly. It's about being empowered to take control of our own growth and using all the tools available to us to create the lives we want.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the science behind affirmations and the importance of critical thinking. But the Inner Balance Redprint episode mentioned something else that I wanted to ask you about: binaural beats. Have you heard of those?
I have. Binaural beats are a really interesting phenomenon. Basically, they're auditory illusions that are created by playing slightly different frequencies into each ear.
Wait, so you're saying we could trick our brains with sound? What does that even do?
It's more than just a trick. It can actually influence our brainwave activity. You know those electrical impulses that are constantly zipping around in our brain?
Yeah, vaguely. I remember learning about them in high school biology, but it was a long time ago.
Well, different brainwave patterns are associated with different mental states, like relaxation, focus, and even sleep. And by using binaural beats, we can actually nudge our brains towards those desired states.
So you're saying we can use sound to change how our brains are functioning. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is pretty amazing. And the idea is that by using binaural beats to shift our brainwaves into a more receptive state, we can make those affirmations even more effective.
So it's like setting the stage for our brains to really absorb those positive messages.
Exactly. And there are specific brainwave frequencies that are thought to be particularly conducive to affirmations.
Like what? I'm picturing some kind of brainwave chart, but I have no idea what I'm looking at.
Well, two of the key ones are alpha and theta waves. Alpha waves are associated with a state of relaxed awareness. It's that feeling you get when you're daydreaming or just waking up. You're relaxed, but still alert.
Okay, I can definitely relate to that. What about theta waves?
Theta waves are linked to deeper states of relaxation, meditation, and creativity. It's that state where you're kind of in between wakefulness and sleep.
So the idea is that if you combine robotic affirmations with binaural beats that are tuned to these frequencies, you're creating the ideal environment for your brain to soak up those positive messages.
Exactly. It's like giving your brain a super boost.
Wow. This is getting pretty complex, but I'm loving it.
It is fascinating stuff. But even with all these cool techniques and technologies, it's important to remember that we're still in control. We're the ones choosing what we listen to and how we use these tools.
Right. It's not about letting technology take over. It's about using it to enhance our own capabilities.
Absolutely. Technology is just a tool. It's up to us to use it wisely and ethically.
Okay, so for our listeners who are really into this idea of robotic affirmations and binaural beats, what are the key things they should keep in mind as they explore this further?
I would say the most important thing is to remember that your mind is incredibly powerful. You have the ability to change your thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors, and technology can be a valuable ally in that process.
We're not just stuck with the hand we're dealt. We can actively shape our own minds.
Exactly, and that's incredibly empowering. Second, be open to exploring new techniques and technologies, but do your research and approach them with a critical eye. Not everything that's shiny and new is going to be effective or beneficial.
Right. It's about finding what works for us and being mindful of the potential risks as well as the benefits.
And finally, I would say never underestimate the power of consistency and intention. Whether it's robotic affirmations, binaural beats, or any other personal development practice, the key to success is making it a regular habit and approaching it with a clear purpose.
It's not about quick fixes. It's about the long game.
Well said. It's about taking charge of our own growth and using all the tools available to us to create the lives we want.
This has been another awesome part of our deep dive. Should we wrap it up with part 3?
Sounds good to me. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground on robotic affirmations, but before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the ethical considerations.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about using technology to potentially influence our thoughts and beliefs at a subconscious level. That's some powerful stuff.
It is. And it raises some important questions about autonomy and manipulation. Just because we can use technology to reprogram our minds doesn't necessarily mean we should.
Right, like what are the potential downsides of all this? Are we messing with something we don't fully understand?
That's definitely a valid concern. I think it's important to remember that our minds are incredibly complex and there's still so much we don't know about how they work. We need to proceed with caution and be mindful of the potential unintended consequences.
So it's like we're in this exciting new frontier, but we need to be responsible explorers.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between embracing innovation and protecting our own well-being.
So what are some specific ethical considerations we should be thinking about when it comes to robotic affirmations?
Well, one big one is informed consent. Are people fully aware of how these technologies work and the potential risks involved? Are they choosing to use them freely, or are they being subtly pressured or manipulated?
Yeah, that's a good point. We need to make sure people are making informed decisions and not just blindly following the latest trend.
Right. And we also need to think about the potential for bias. Who's creating these affirmations and what are their intentions? Are they promoting values that are aligned with our own, or are they subtly trying to shape our beliefs in a way that benefits them?
That's kind of scary, actually. Like, what if someone created robotic affirmations designed to make people more consumeristic or more likely to vote a certain way?
It's definitely something to be aware of. We need to be critical consumers of this technology and not just assume that all affirmations are created equal.
Okay, so informed consent and bias, those are two big ones. What else should we be considering?
I think it's also important to think about the potential for dependence. What happens if we become reliant on these technologies to feel good about ourselves? Are we undermining our own ability to cultivate self-esteem and resilience?
Ah, so it's like anything else, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing.
Right. It's about finding that healthy balance. We don't want to become so dependent on technology that we lose touch with our own inner resources.
So it's about using these tools to empower ourselves, not to disable ourselves.
Exactly. It's about being mindful and intentional about how we're using technology to shape our minds and lives.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into robotic affirmations,
hmm
what's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I would say the most important thing is to approach this technology with a sense of curiosity and critical thinking. Don't just blindly accept everything you hear. Do your research, ask questions, and make informed choices about how you're using these tools.
Be the scientist of your own life.
Love it. And remember that your mind is incredibly powerful and adaptable. You have the ability to shape your own thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors with or without technology.
So it's not about relying on robots to do the work for us. It's about using them as a tool to enhance our own capabilities.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole topic so exciting. We're on the cusp of a new era of personal growth, and technology is going to play a huge role. But it's up to us to use it wisely and ethically.
Well said. This has been such a fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into robotic affirmations. Keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.